And Drew Hendrickson is the moderator. Drew lives in Portland, Maine, and he works as a mentor for at-risk and delinquent youth. He recently graduated from Union Theological Seminary with a Master's of Divinity degree. He has experience working with refugee communities in South America and Africa. Drew is also a sports enthusiast and a diehard fan of all Boston sports teams. So he's the perfect moderator for today. So Drew?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. This is, I think, one of the only sports themed activities of the day, so it's the one I've been looking forward to the most. I think it'll be a great time. We're with Glenn Stout. Glenn Stout is the series editor of the Best American Sports Writing of the Year. He's been doing this since 1991, which was when this series began. He's also author and editor of more than 80 books, including Young Woman in the Sea, How Trudy Ederle Conquered the English Channel and Inspired the World, Fenway1912, which is due out in October, and the Good Sports Juvenile series. He currently lives in Alberg, Vermont, and has lived for 20 years in and around Boston, often within walking distance of Fenway Park. So Glenn, welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
And like she said earlier, this is going to be kind of free form. Anybody feels like interrupting at any time, feel free. But I'm going to start out by reading a little bit from the introduction to Fenway1912, because that sort of gives an explanation about how I got into this business and some of my thoughts on sports and sports writing. And then Drew's going to ask a few questions and we'll just launch out from there. So, and this is from Fenway1912, which is a book that'll be coming out in October about the first year in Fenway Park, the construction of the ballpark, the Red Sox 1912 season, and the 1912 World Series. So, Fenway Park changed my life. I grew up outside a small town in central Ohio and was never really a Red Sox fan as a kid. But my awareness of Major League Baseball happened to coincide with the 1967 Impossible Dream Team. I recall watching Billy Rohr on the news that day he almost threw his no-hitter and seeing his hat fall off after nearly every pitch. The 1967 season was the first I followed, eagerly waiting for the newspaper every afternoon so I could devour box scores from the night before. During the World Series, I remember running off the bus and down the driveway to watch the final innings on television. I can still see Julian Javier's Game 7 home run over the left field wall seal Boston's fate as Jim Lonborg, pitching on 2 days' rest, fell heroically to Bob Gibson and the Cardinals. Later that fall, my parents bought me a baseball bat that's still too big for me to use, but one I absolutely had to have because it had Carl Yastrzemski's signature on the barrel. For some reason I've never understood, baseball grabbed me as a kid and has never let go. If I wasn't playing or looking at baseball cards or reading baseball books, I was spending hours drawing ballparks and fields, measuring distances precisely and to scale. At one point I even began elaborate plans to construct Jet Stadium, home of the local minor league team, the AAA Columbus Jets, out of popsicle sticks. I never built my scale model, but getting lost in a ballpark, even one of the imagination, has always been easy for me. It was so again as I wrote this book. Jet Stadium was nice, but while growing up, I never had the opportunity to live in a city with a ballpark, and I wanted to see Major League Baseball the real way. So in the fall of 1981, in the midst of a recession, only 5 months after graduating from Bard College in upstate New York with a degree in creative writing and finding myself back home in Ohio pouring concrete, I sold my trombone, packed up the Dodge Dart, rented up a small U-Haul trailer, and drove. New York and Yankee Stadium were too scary. Chicago, despite Comiskey Park and Wrigley Field, was still the Midwest and way too close to home. But I had friends in Boston, and Boston had Fenway Park. So after a drive of almost 18 hours, including a detour to Manhattan to pick up my girlfriend, I pulled up in front of a $225 a month studio apartment far out on Commonwealth Avenue, across the street from the Terrace Motel. There were no jobs in Boston then. This was before nearly 25 years of nonstop economic growth changed the face of the city. And after a month, we were down to counting spare change. When I accidentally dumped a bowl of spaghetti on the floor, we ate it anyway. On Christmas Eve, I got a job. We did. On Christmas Eve, I got a job as a security guard at minimum wage and worked double shifts through the holidays to make the rent. Boston was different then. Everything was gritty and worn. There was broken glass everywhere. The sidewalks outside every bar were stained with vomit. There were no yuppies. Boylston Street was abandoned at night. Punk rock still had a chance. I lost my car and unpaid parking tickets, but survived the winter. And in the spring, my girlfriend nabbed a job at Boston University. We scammed our way into some sublease staff housing in Kenmore Square, hence close to Fenway Park, and I wrote papers for BU and Harvard students for extra money. In 1982, I made $6,000. But that was plenty. I was right around the corner from Fenway Park. The first time I walked up the tunnel in the bleachers, a batting practice home run by Reggie Jackson almost hit me on the head. $10 got me into the ballpark and left enough change for 3 beers. For another $10, I could go to the Rat, see some rock and roll, drink 2 or 3 more beers, and careen home in 5 minutes. I probably went to 24 games that year, plus a few more after the ushers abandoned the gates to the bleachers after the 3rd or 4th inning, and I walked in with the panhandlers and drunks who collected empty beer cups for a teaspoon of swill. I was poor, but I had baseball. Walking up that runway into the bleachers that summer changed my life. It was my grad school. I majored in Fenway Park, Kenmore Square, the Del Fuegos, poetry, baseball, and books. I fell in love. I saw, watched, learned, got curious, did research, read, stopped dreaming about writing, and started doing it. I went to work at the Boston Public Library and discovered that Red Sox history lives in thousands of reels of Boston newspapers on microfilm. My universe stretched from Kenmore Square to Copley, with Mass Ave as the axis. The city paid me to go to library school. I got lucky, stumbled on a story, sold it to Boston Magazine, and have never been without an assignment since. Still doing the work I do today, writing. None of this would have happened without Fenway Park. None of it at all. And that's what makes a ballpark different and what makes Fenway Park different, because it's a place that can change your life and sometimes does. Almost 100 years ago, it changed the lives of almost every baseball fan in Boston. And each season, as another generation of fans discover it, Fenway Park changes their lives as well. That's just part of the introduction from the Fenway book, but I thought it was appropriate because it kind of introduces how I got into this. The rest of the book proceeds as a straight historical narrative and doesn't talk about me at all. But I thought it was important for people to know why I've always been so drawn to Fenway Park and how that's really played such a central role in how my career's evolved over almost 30 years.
Wow, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So my first question is just a simple one, is what makes great sports writing?
Back when we started the Best American Sports Writing book back in 1991, just before we'd started it, I attended with a friend of mine, I'd only been freelancing for a couple of years at that point, and I attended a retirement dinner for Tim Horgan, who some of you might remember. Tim Horgan was a columnist for the Boston Herald and a very good writer, very sadly sort of forgotten today. I think he was a really good guy. And at his retirement dinner, he mentioned that, and I actually used this in the introduction to that first book, he mentioned that he's often approached by students who say, "Oh, I love sports, I want to be a sports writer." And he says, I always stop them right there. And he says, you have to love the writing. It's not the sports, but you have to love the writing. So that's what I think the key to good sports writing is. The same thing that's the key to any kind of writing. You know, I look at it as, yeah, I write a lot about sports, not exclusively, not always, but that's sort of incidental. In the sports writing book, we try to reprint stories that are good enough that whether you like sports or not, or like that sport or not, you're going to enjoy the story for writing. And I think the best sports writing is just fine writing. Now, what I look for as the editor of that book, as much as anything else, I think the best writing announces itself pretty quickly. There's a confidence from the first word. You know, the writer isn't feeling around for a start. You know, it's just, you know, in journalism you always have to have that strong lead. And when I talk to kids, I tell them, you know, that's the most important thing that you have to do is you have to write in a strong lead, because I try to think like the reader in that book. And if I open up that book, the collection of sports writing, I open it up to a story, and if I'm in a bookstore, I'm thinking like a reader. I open it up, I see a story, I start to read it. You've got 2 sentences, maybe, to hook me. And if you don't, then I'm closing that book and I'm picking up another one. And that's the same with any kind of writing, whether it's sports writing or anything else. W.C. Hines, who some of you might recognize, Bill Hines, he was a fabulous sports writer, just passed away a few years ago. Also was responsible for the novel MASH and some other things. But I heard him do an interview one time, and I thought this rang so true. And again, he was talking about sports writing, but it's true for any kind of writing. Bill also wrote novels and several other things. He said that the hardest part for him was always the start. And he said he always looked at it, he says, like a piece of classical music. He says, I have to get the first few chords right. He says, once I get the first few chords right, then it all flows from there. And that's something that I look for in the stories that I read for the sports writing book, because I read 10,000 stories a year, probably, something like that. I don't read all of them, all the way to the end. You know, I'm like the reader. You've got a paragraph maybe to hook me on it. And in that first paragraph, I want to hear the confidence in those chords, that I know that it's going to be worth my while to read onward. And that's one of the things that I look for. The other thing, you know, there's a reason that that book is sports writing, 2 words, rather than sports writing, which is 1 word. Sports writing, 1 word, is, I think, in the minds of most people, and in my mind certainly, that's more sports reporting. And not that sports reporting cannot also be fine writing, but it's often done for a different purpose. Sports writing, 2 words, again, we're looking for writing that happens to be about sports, that works that way. And, you know, to that end, a lot of sports writing kind of cancels itself out from the beginning. A lot of columnists today ape sports talk radio, just kind of, you know, somebody's screaming and stomping their feet. They want to tell the 3-year-old that wants the attention, you know, because that's how the world works now. It's just get the attention. If you get somebody's attention for a minute, then you're a success. And that might be fine and well if your criteria is page hits and, you know, being on PTI or another, you know, talk radio show that is all about screaming. But, you know, you sit with books, you linger with books, you spend time with them, and 99% of that stuff doesn't translate to the page. If you see transcripts I mean, that's the thing with a lot of columnists. They read like sports talk transcripts, which is like, you know, why would you ever read this again in your life? You know, already it's 2 minutes you're never getting back. So, you know, hopefully with that book, we try to have material in there that is something that you're going to want to read again. And that's the only criteria I've ever been able to put to it in the sports writing book is after reading a story once, if I want to read it again, it goes in the very small pile of stories that I keep. The other stories that I can't get through or get through and then look at the clock and go, there goes another 5 minutes, that goes to the recycling center every Saturday in the back of my truck. Some right there in the back of my truck right now, as a matter of fact. So I got to make a run when I get home. So that's sort of what I look for and what I appreciate.
Yeah.
You know, I like any writing. You want it to have shape. You want it to have pace and rhythm and form. And you know, you look at the old sports columns by someone like a Red Smith and compare them to some of the sports columns being written today, and they're 2 different things entirely. You know, Red Smith's old columns or Bill Hines' old columns, they had shape, they had form, they had craft. They weren't just like, I'm going to complain about what happened yesterday and, you know, and I'm going to be snide about it and you're going to listen to me because I'm going to scream it louder than the next guy. That really doesn't interest me.
And you talked about it a little bit, but how do you think like new media is affecting this part of the industry, this part of writing? You know, there's so much content out there now. News cycles are so fast. Like there's a ton of websites, ESPN. There's all cable channels. I mean, we're in it, like, if you're a fan, you follow this, well, you get so much information.
Right, right.
How is it affecting the craft that you're talking about? It seems like they're almost separated out, but they must overlap in some way.
I think there's good parts and there's bad parts. On the good side, you know, it is very democratic and it's open to everybody. If you've got an idea and an opinion, you can now be a writer. You can have your blog site, your website, or find somebody else's that lets you put it on there, and you can write about stuff. And that's great because it does motivate some people and give some people an opportunity that otherwise would not have an opportunity, because the opportunities in sort of the mainstream publishing are fewer and farther between. You know, it's almost impossible to get a job with a newspaper. Pages are down in magazines. So that part of it's really good and has led to some really, really inventive writing that I come across and that I appreciate. There are some blog sites that I look at regularly. At the same token, because it's open to everybody, there's a lot of garbage that gets done, and it makes it harder to sift through it all to find the good stuff, because you find a lot of garbage sometimes first. So, you know, it's always, you know, the blogs and everything, it's always going to be there. I've got one myself now that I put things on now and again. Everything is trending that direction. You just hope that with anything, you know, what you get off the internet now is a lot of first drafts. And you hope that as time passes, you start getting more finished product. And you do. I know websites where that's taken place, and writers that work on them that has taken place. That's what it doesn't happen with everybody, though. Some people it's just first thought, best thought, only thought, you know, still. And so that makes it, you know, a little more difficult. And then once again, it's who are their models. If you've got your blog, is your model for writing a writer who really has talent, or is your model for writing that you just want to get attention? You know, you want to scream the loudest. Is that, you know, do you like the guys on PTI? Is that what you want to be doing? Is that your goal? You know, we were talking before, and you know, my rant against sports talk radio, which I'll repeat ad infinitum because I just think it's like horrible, 90% of it. And it saddens me when writers that I admire, particularly sports writers, stop writing and start talking. Now, I know why they're doing it, because the money's better. That's a given, I understand that. But, you know, there's not a writer out there that ever got better talking on the radio. The first one that does will be the first one. And that's true, because, you know, there's guys that I used to get stories from in the sports writing book and really go, wow, he's good and I admire him. And, you know, he's got a radio show now or a TV show, and, you know, they're not doing the work anymore. You know, it's a lot easier to talk on the radio than it is to sit down and write. You know, and you get a lot more positive, immediate feedback too. You know, you get recognized, you get the big check, you get recognized, and you don't have to work. You just have to talk. I mean, this is easy, talking. I can do that. You know, the writing part's a little harder.
Well, I'd like to open it up for questions. If you have any ideas or thoughts, questions, comments, for sure, everything, and we'll just kind of open up a conversation.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
Out in the back.
Well, as a sports writer, aren't you writing to dreamers? People who dream. Dustin Pedroia has a good day. So what? It doesn't pay the bills. No, seriously, you're writing for dreamers.
Well, a lot, you know, it depends on, you know, I've never written for a daily newspaper, for one thing, which is good, because I actually, the only time I ever had a chance, I turned it down. Yeah, you are, you know, people, it is, I mean, there's a reason why they call it the toy department, you know, the sports department, because you are kind of, you know, we're not changing the world overtly, but, you know, at the same token, it's also, through sports, it's also easier sometimes to approach issues that are difficult to approach in other venues. And in that regard, for instance, I think about my great friend who's since passed away, David Halberstam, who was central to my career. He was very, very good to me and very, very helpful to me. And, you know, this is someone who was able to approach complicated issues of race and politics through sports and carry people along that way. In the juvenile series of books that I work on now, the Good Sports series, the title that's over there is called Yes, She Can, which is about women's sports pioneers. I'm telling the story of a woman swimming the English Channel, but I'm really telling the story to young women, making them realize you can do stuff you've never even dreamed about. And I think at its best, all writing, whatever genre you're in, is actually talking about larger themes. You know, I stumbled into writing about sports. It wasn't my intention, you know, but it's retained my attention because it's given me the opportunity to write about larger things in this different context and to reach an audience in that otherwise you maybe can't always reach.
Thank you.
So, yeah, right here first.
I may be biased because of my excessive love of baseball in relation to other sports that I enjoy. But it seems to me, thinking over what I have read over the years of books and stories about sports, that there's a disproportionate amount of good writing about baseball in relation to other sports. That there's certainly some very fine writing about golf and wrestling and basketball and many sports, but that there is a preponderance of good writing about baseball. Do you have any theories as to why this is so?
Well, you know, I think it was Frank DeFord that said it was the small ball theory. The smaller the Frank DeFord,
The smaller
the small ball theory. He said the smaller the ball, the better the writing. You know, golf, tennis, baseball, good writing. You know, football, bowling, medicine balls, bad writing. And I'm not sure I ascribe to that completely, but it's interesting. You know, baseball, I think, works for a couple reasons. One, you have a lot of time. I mean, you know, I tend to watch a game every night, but I'm not sitting there like this. You know, I've got maybe something I'm working on, editing, I'm doing some reading, I'm, you know, drinking beer, whatever else, doing a lot of other things. And then also, I think because baseball has such a deep roots in our cultural history, is that, you know, it just taps into stuff that's way back. You know, it has been around for 100 years. I mean, it really was the first, you know, sports hasn't been around that long. You know, turn of the century, it was baseball, boxing, and bicycling. Bicycling was a big sport then. That was it, you know. And because baseball goes back so far, and, you know, boxing and bicycling are not what they used to be, baseball has this longer tradition. And I can go in doing a baseball history book like Red Sox Century or Yankee Century, and I'm into, you know, well, in this book on Fenway, you know, I'm quoting Ring Lardner. I'm quoting Damon Runyon on stuff. You know, writers in their own right, outside of sports writing, who have real gravitas and guts. And so, you know, it's easy to draw those threads farther back. That's why I think baseball works. Plus, once you have a tradition of writing, which there is a tradition of baseball, it builds its fan base, you know. There isn't as much of a fan base of great basketball writers. I mean, just think for a minute, oh, who are the greatest basketball writers of all time? I'm like, you know, Bob Ryan. You know, it's just whereas you can go with baseball, you go, oh, I just said Ring Lardner, you know, Damon Runyon, all these guys wrote about it, so it's a little different then. Yeah.
Sorry to tie back Red Smith to new media. When I was a kid, you know, I'd pick up the newspaper and I'd want to know box scores. I'd want to know what happened in the game, who won, how many innings pitched. Now, by the time I read my Globe the next morning, I've known that. I've seen it on the internet. So the role of your daily sports writer should be changed. Yet it's not where nobody cares that Dice K, you know, was taken out of the fifth inning because we've already heard it on ESPN, Yahoo Sports, whatever. There seems to be an opportunity where we should be having more content. I'm subscribing to what you're saying.
More and different kinds of
content. There should be more content that I'm picking up that Globe. I don't want to know what happened. I want to know why it happened.
Yeah, and I think newspapers are still struggling to find out what they're supposed to do now. You know, and I don't think they have figured it out. I mean, because, you know, to a great degree, I mean, you've got a lot of people still in the industry who've been there 30, 40 years who are going to continue to do what they did the whole time that they've been there. I mean, that's what they know to do. They have name identification. People still do pick up the paper to, as much as you might not like him, to read such and such or so, you know, kick around what he said and everything. But unquestionably, I mean, you know, just with, and it's not only in sports, but in a lot of things that are being covered in newspapers. Newspapers are grappling what to do, what to be. And it's not an easy transition. You know, no one's found the real answer yet. You know, I mean, they're still trying to figure out how to make this internet thing pay, you know, and they haven't figured it out yet.
Quality writing.
Well, you know, I think in a lot of ways they've shot themselves in the foot by kind of deciding that less is more. You know, the stories are all short now because the assumption is newspapers have tried to ape the internet rather than shape the internet. And I think that's been kind of a mistake from the get-go. And here I'm throwing this idea. This is my idea for newspapers to survive in the future. It's my free idea of the world. Nobody has taken me up on it yet, but this is how they can do it. Because, you know, they're all, like the New York Times now has a paywall, and they're all trying to monetize the internet. And there's one thing people have paid with computers, and that's speed. You know, if you got DSL and a T-line comes, you dump that, you want the T-line, you know. If you've got the high-end computer this year and the next one is a millisecond faster, you dump it and you buy it. And we've all done it. We've all bought like 15 computers in the last 20 years. I always thought that that's how the pay model should proceed with newspapers. Keep it all free, but make it slow. If you want it fast, pay for it. 5-second delay, you know how it drives you crazy when a website loads now? I mean, we're all off dial-up now. And it used to be like, you know, you'd want to put a bullet to your head when it was dial-up and that thing was, you know, the picture was scrolling. But now you click on it and you expect to have it then. And even a 2-second delay is like infuriating. I've always thought newspapers, keep it all free, put a governor on it so we have to wait 5 seconds. But if you want it instantaneously, pay for it. I think that's the model that would work, because that's the only thing with computers and the internet that people have paid for is speed, nothing else on a large scale. So someone go make it happen. Yes?
Just an opinion, but it seemed like 40 or 50 years ago, these sports figures were so much more compelling. You know, Ted Williams and Arnold Palmer and Jackie Robinson, people like that. Today you have people like LeBron James or, you know, Roger Clemens, or a lot of human beings that you really just don't seem to give a damn about because they don't seem to give a damn about anyone else but themselves. Do you see that as a phenomenon?
Well, I think
we
it's
destroyed our sports heroes.
Well, I think I think what you're saying is a real phenomenon, and I think there's reasons for it. You know, if you were to go back 40, 50, 60 years ago, there wasn't that big of a difference between your biggest sports figure and yourself. You know, they lived in the same world. You know. Like in Brooklyn, they lived in the same neighborhood. You know, we were talking before about Lib Dooley. Lib Dooley, sitting in the front row, could become friends with Ted Williams. I knew somebody that became friends with Ted Williams when he was about 16. He'd walk with Ted from the ballpark over to the Sheraton where Ted where Ted kept an apartment, and he just became. I mean, Ted was like 15 years older than this guy. But he became one of Ted Williams' closest friends because, you know, he got to know him walking back from the ballpark, and then Ted would, you know, send him out to get him a sandwich or stuff like that. Now, because of the money, they're in different worlds. You know, they're in the gated communities. They are in different worlds. They feel that they're in different worlds. They do not feel that they have anything in common with you whatsoever. It's unfortunate. It's true with 95% of the guys today. I hate to say it, but it's true. Even the guys you think that are really great from what you see on TV, most of them, you know, you're what's on the bottom of their shoe right now, because they're making so much money. They're in a different world. They're masters of the universe, and they're used to everybody kowtowing to them. And once you become accustomed to that, you know, it's hard to be a regular guy. And quite frankly, they're being assaulted at all times by people that want things. I mean, I have a good friend who has much more interaction with contemporary athletes today than I do. And I don't think he ever did the series, but he started working on a series one time, and it was just talking to athletes about loaning money. And the horror stories, all these, how, you know, what his first question would be to, like, you know, Gary Sheffield. How much money have you lost in loans to family and friends? And the guys would go, you know, $10 million. You know, and that's not a rarity. Well, exactly, you know. You know, they're ill-equipped for it, and so, you know, to answer your question, I think the money is most of it. They're kept in a different world. They don't have to interact with us. In the old days, they knew that being nice to sports writers and being nice to fans earned them some extra money. It might have got them that bread advertisement, and that bread advertisement might get the new car. Now it's like a bread advertisement for what? You know, they got all the money.
So how would you write in a compelling way or tell a story that connects with regular readers, like regular people, about these athletes who are in so many ways completely disconnected?
Well, one of the things when I've done juvenile writing, and before I started my own series, I wrote the sports biographies under the Matt Christopher name. And one of the things that I found in doing those books, what worked for me, which helped connect the kids to the athletes, and, you know, we tried to use role models that told good stories and everything. Not always successfully, because you'd write a book and then the guy would, you know, beat somebody up or whatever. But it happened more often than it didn't. But one of the things I liked to do was try to find stories about the athletes when they were kids. I would, just the nature of the books, I would never interview the athletes themselves, but I might track down their high school coach or a youth league coach if I could find a name and a reference. And that was always enlightening. For instance, I did one of the Matt Christopher books on the pitcher Randy Johnson. And, you know, I wanted to know more about Johnson's high school career. There really wasn't much there. I call up his high school coach, and he's like, "Oh yeah, well, you know, because Johnson had that reputation when he first came up as being like so wild and everything." I said, "Was Randy wild in high school?" He says, like, "Oh no." He says they were so afraid of him. He says they swung at everything. You know, so you put that little thing in, and then it was like, well, what did he play when he wasn't pitching? He said, "Oh, he was a center fielder." And you imagine like the string bean, 6'11", standing out in center field, you know, and you know if you get a hit, he's coming in to pitch, you know. So, you know, Michael Jordan getting cut from his 9th grade basketball team, stuff like that. I'd try to find those little nuggets of when they were kids, because when they were kids, then they're all still the same as the rest of us. It starts to change when they become professional, or now even sometimes when they're in college, and you know, you get all the hype that goes along with that. But that's when it's all still the same. And even when I've interviewed contemporary athletes, if you can get them talking about when they were kids, then all the other stuff goes away. The project never came through, but for a while it looked like I was going to be doing something with the Major League Baseball Players Association. And I got to interview a couple of guys in anticipation of that, and then the whole thing fell apart. It didn't happen. And that's what I was focusing on, was I wanted to know, you know, what games did you play when you were a kid in your backyard? Like I was asking Justin Verlander, the Detroit Tigers, about that. And he's like, "Oh yeah, we played this game with the brick wall," you know, and he's giving me this whole complicated set of rules in their backyard about, you know, where the ball bounced after you threw it up against the brick wall. I think those are universal stories that people respond to, and that kind of stuff, you know. Yeah, Charlie.
I know this is an impossible question because you've been editing this series for 20 years, but are there like 2 or 3 of those stories that you just can't get out of your mind? That
Yeah.
You just think are the perfect stories?
Yeah, one is by J.R. Moringer, who wrote The Tender Bar. He wrote a story several years ago called Resurrecting the Champ. And it's in the Best American Sports Writing of the Century collection we did. I think it was in the sports writing book in the late 90s at some point. Has the best beginning of any story I've ever read in my life. The best lead. It's boom. Talk about confidence, talk about hitting those right chords. It's there. It's actually reprinted right now. An acquaintance of mine has a blog that's called sonofboldventure.com. Bold Venture, the old racehorse, sonofboldventure.com. He's got a blog posting on the beginning of that story, which he reprints, that's up right now. Another one is a story by, and you see, it just goes to show you that none of this is cut and dry. Bill Plaschke, who's on PTI all the time, columnist for the Los Angeles Times. He wrote a story several years ago called Her Blue Haven. Her Blue Haven. And it's about a woman who is a Dodgers fan who essentially lived in the desert in a trailer and was disabled and created her own blog on a computer. And he had read this blog and then sought her out, not knowing that she was just this destitute woman living in a trailer in the desert with her mother, who was an enormous Dodger fan. And even thinking about that story, it starts to tear me up because it's just pitch perfect from the word go. And a third one I'll bring up is by William Knack. It was called Pure Heart, about the horse Secretariat. And very early in that story, he talks, the story begins with the autopsy of Secretariat. And it talks about the size of the horse's heart, the physical size of the horse's heart, which was twice the size of a normal horse when they opened up the horse to do the autopsy. And it's just terrific. Those three, I think in the introduction to the sports writing book this year, I kind of go back each of the 20 years in something that sticks in my head. And I think I mentioned that those are the three stories that if, you know, I had to go to that desert island and just read three things over and over again, those would be the three. And then there's probably about a dozen more that would fight for fourth place on any given day. And maybe tomorrow I might think of one of those too, but there's a few of them.
About the Knack piece, first of all, you can't not cry and read that thing.
No, you can't.
But it's not cheap tears either.
Nope, nope.
And the other thing that's really kind of amazing is that it's as much about Knack as about the horse. And he's very much a character in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of brings it down from the level of the gods to the level of people who are trying to figure out the gods.
Right. Well, each of those three stories that I cited are also in many ways as much about the writer.
Right.
You know, another one which I should mention, look up, and you can find it online too, the W.C. Hines column called Death of a Racehorse, which is not about, he doesn't appear in it at all, but it's just a little vignette that appeared as a column in the newspaper, one of 5 he was doing a week, 52 weeks a year. And that phrase, son of bold venture, actually comes from that story, but look it up, it's called Death of a Racehorse. And that's another one that, I mean, I'll stack up any of those four stories, and including Death of a Racehorse, I'll stack those things up against anything written about anything. I mean, you know, great writing is great writing. And that stuff holds up with anything that could be done. Yes?
I have two questions. One's about your Fenway, or one kind of plays off that question. Yeah, with all the kind of negative stuff, you know, the internet, the guys losing their stuff going on TV, it doesn't seem from your introduction that you felt like you had any less great stories to work from. You know, there's stuff in this book, these books that I can give to anybody, whether they like sports or not. You know, the woman whose molester taught her how to backpack, and then she brought him back out there to confront him on it. That story you can give to anybody. It's as compelling as anything.
Yeah.
And the kids who won the basketball game, 2-on-5. I mean, there's stuff in there. So I guess my question to you is, it seems like the numbers it seems like with all the negative stuff, it still seems that there's a real high quality of stuff out
Well, that's because, you can't keep writers down. I mean, most people aren't making a whole lot of money doing this. If they're making it at all, some aren't making any, but if you're a writer, you find a story, you write it, regardless. One of the best pieces of advice I ever had was from one of my teachers in college, and I didn't study journalism in college at all, I studied poetry, and he was like, don't worry about getting published. He says, if your stuff's good enough, he says, it'll get published. Just worry about writing good stuff. And, today, if you write good stuff, you might not be able to sell it, but you'll be able to publish it. And, maybe someone like me will find it and it gets a larger audience. In the sports writing book, that one, the Peter Gammons one, there's a story in there called Death of a Pitcher. And it's about a kid who was pitching for a university in Mexico who ended up being like a side casualty in the Mexican drug wars. Kid that wrote it, it's on his own blog, first entry on his blog. Never published anything. I don't even know how I found it. I was looking for something else. And I saw, and the name of the blog was pitchersandpoets.com. Well, as an old poet, it's like, old poet and an old pitcher. It's like, okay, you just suckered, like, I don't know if he looked up my background, like, how can I sucker this guy in or not? But it worked, and I looked at it, and I read it, and I hardly ever do this. I sent him an email right away that just said, this is really good. Just keep doing what you do. I don't know anything about you. At that time, I didn't know it was his first thing he'd ever done or anything. I said, I don't know anything about you, but keep doing it. And then I pushed it through to Gammons, and everything goes forward to the guest editors basically without comment. They don't know, they usually don't know who's written it or where it came from, and I was thrilled that he picked it because, there's all these big names out there making tons of money, and here's this kid in, 23 years old, living at home, starting a blog with his friends about stuff he's interested in. Because, that's how any writer, you just follow your interests. I started writing about sports because, okay, I like poetry, I like sports. How can I put those two things together? I used to, on opening day for 9 years, I used to read baseball poetry outside Fenway Park underneath the Green Monster before I published anything. And I made contacts doing that are, like I met Bill Littlefield in National Public Radio doing that. He was just doing his radio thing. You never know, but I thought, well, okay, combine the two things I like, blindly, okay, I'll do that. And, damn if it doesn't work sometimes. Yes?
I've noticed within the last year or so when I read a baseball biography, it takes me longer because I'm always looking things up. I mentioned her once in a while. I have to get up and look it up because somebody will make a comment about something and say, did that really? He batted third in the American League in 1926, and it's crazy. I know it's true, but I still have to look it up. But I also find errors from time to time. Does it take you a long time? You check your sources? Do you go to like different baseball encyclopedias?
Yeah, we all try to do, a lot of people don't understand the only things that are fact-checked, that are written these days, are stories in big magazines. They are rigorously fact-checked. My first bylines were in Boston Magazine, and everything was fact-checked. But book publishers don't fact-check anything, except juvenile books. I write those juvenile books, I get queries back as long as my arm back from the children's book editors. Now, adult trade books are not fact-checked at all. So the onus is on the author to do the best job you possibly can. And we all try to, and sometimes we do it better than other times. When I did Red Sox Century, I ended up getting a letter from somebody, and it was like, here are your 59 mistakes. Now, to be fair, about half of those were questions of interpretation. When I said he was one of the best, I would say, oh, he was one of the best hitters on the team. Well, he was only the seventh. It's like, okay, well, we can. But, he did spot some errors, mostly numerical. And if you're doing baseball, there's the guys in Sabre who are down, they want to catch you, man. That's what they live for. They want to catch you. And he was right on all those errors. And the reason being is that one of the, now this is before the internet too, is one of the hard copy statistical sources I was using was full of errors. And I didn't know it. So garbage in, garbage out. Now I actually hire somebody. She's a girl who is from my town up in Vermont who now lives in Boston. She's interested in writing and publishing, although she doesn't do that for a living. She likes sports and likes baseball. And so she's perfect for me because I'll turn the manuscript over to her afterwards. I say, I want you to check every number for me. And she knows enough to know how to do it, but she doesn't know enough to think that she knows it all already. Whereas if I picked some sports nut guy like you, you'd think, oh, I can do that. I know this. She's like, I like the fact that she's not confident. And, and I try to check everything. I mean, I'm doing the final galley edits on this weekend, and there's probably a dozen places now where I've underlined it and put a question mark and a check. So when I get back home on Monday before I call up the final changes, I want to just double check to make sure, because the lag time between when you write and when it's published is so long. I mean, I don't even recognize. I'm like, really? I've looked up stuff in my own books. I think, oh my God, that can't be right. Like, I'll pick up a book like 3 years later, I'm writing something else, and I'll look in my old book about that. I'm like, oh my God, how'd I mess that up? And the best story, though, is making a mistake, which I caught. But I was doing the book I did on the Dodgers. And remember when Kirk Gibson hit the home run? Okay? And the announcer said, I can't believe what I just saw. Right? And I thought, Vin Scully. That was a chapter title. Okay? And I mentioned that it's Vin Scully. I get the galleys back, and it's the day I'm sending them back in. And I happened to flipping channels, and like ESPN Sports Classic was running a thing on that. Jack Buck. Wasn't Vin Scully. It was Jack Buck. In my mind, it sounds just like Vin Scully, but it was Jack Buck. So in a panic, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, you got to change it. It wasn't too late, but because I was convinced that like those pages were rolling off the press right now, and that would have been an enormous mistake that everybody would have said, what an idiot, and they would have been right.
One quick thing, I was reading about the Finding Cooperstown short book, and about quite a way into it, one of the writers gets on a train going down to Cooperstown, and he says, may I sit next to you with Cy Young? And the comment is, Cy Young, the winner of 523 Major League games. Well, I don't know how many people know he only won 511, but when he said that, I had to look nice. I don't know if it was 523, 524, but I said, did I miss something here? And I actually looked up a couple places. That's crazy.
Yeah. The stuff that trips you up is the stuff you think you know cold.
The rest of the book, sure.
It's the stuff, well, it doesn't. It does make you question it, and it should. But it's the stuff like me thinking, oh, it was Vin Scully. It's the stuff you think you know cold that you don't need to check. That's the stuff that's like. So now, one of the mistakes I would keep on making, like in one book, somewhere I referenced, I think, Hank Greenberg batting from the wrong side, And so now I just unless I really need it, I leave out left-handed, right-handed. But even then, the first juvenile book in my new series came out, and I get it, and I hadn't seen the cover copy. Hank Greenberg's name was spelled wrong on it. On the front, it says Greenberg, E-R-G. And then on the back of the book, I have a whole website for the Good Sports series called goodsportsbyglennstout.com. Not in that first book, it says goodsports.com. Well, that's another whole other website. So, and I didn't see it. I never got the copy. Now I get the copy. They send it to me. So you do what you can. You really try, because the last thing you want is, and inevitably too, it'll be some public forum. You're great. You're signing books and something. On page 412, and that's why there's they don't let you carry weapons, because you're just like, not now. Write me a letter, don't stand up in front of 500 people and tell me how I misspelled something. That's what spell check's for anyway.
We've got a couple more minutes, and then we'll move into the part where Glenn will sign some of the books. Are there just one more question? Sure.
As far as the sports writing itself goes, do you feel that the attention spans are diminishing among some people? I mean, now that we have the handhelds that you can get a lot downloaded, and of course the blogs are out there, do you feel there's still a place for the 600-word column or 3,000-word feature?
I think if the writing's good, the length doesn't matter. If the writing's bad, it can't be too short, you know. But if the writing's good, I think people will sit and read an 10,000 word story if the writing's good. But if it's not, I mean, a 300-word story is too long sometimes. It's just, you know, that's why I say when people say, how do you read 10,000 stories a year? Because a lot of them I stop after the first 3 or 4 sentences. And if that's not right, if that doesn't capture me, I don't have time for it. You know, and that's how I kind of look at everything, even for the stuff I'm just reading for pleasure too on the internet and stuff. I don't have a lot of time to waste reading bad writing. There's enough of that, but there is good writing. I want to leave time for the good writing. I think it's more difficult I feel bad for younger people, for kids who don't even realize sometime that the long form stuff is out there. Which is, I think, true. I mean, there's great websites now for like long-form journalism. Longform.org is one. Gangry.com is another that just link to like great long-form journalism. And they're great aggregators. You know, they're bringing everything together. But, you know, you've got to be able to find those. And I worry that kids don't find them because one of the saddest experiences of my life was talking to somebody's sports journalism class last year or the year before. And, you know, you're talking to a sports journalism class, and they're all like this the whole time on their laptops, not even looking at you. And so you don't know if they're listening, if they're playing Sudoku, or just cruising the internet, or taking notes. They could be taking notes. But it was like, I just got the feeling that like nobody was paying attention at all. And it's like, why are you here? You know, I don't need to be here. You know, if I get invited back again, I'm saying one condition: no laptops on, no computers on. You know, just.
There are a lot of professors now who are prohibiting laptops
Yeah.
in their classrooms.
For that reason, yeah, exactly. I mean, it just struck me as like really like, well, you're paying a lot of money to go to school, and you're not even, you know. I mean, I fooled around at school too, but I pulled it together for 2 hours a week for a class, you know. Sort of.
In your introduction to your Fenway piece, with the scalpers holding a lot of the tickets and with the prices being so much, if you landed there today with your money,
Oh, I know.
could that happen? Could that story happen today?
Very, very difficult. I mean, the story I always tell is that when I was poor, I could go to Fenway Park whenever I wanted. And now I'm not poor and I can't afford to go.
Well, Glenn, are you the one who wrote that article in the Globe about buying tickets at the last minute?
No, no, the only story I ever wrote about, this is actually a great story about tickets at Fenway. Well, I had some really interesting experience with tickets at Fenway. Once I bought tickets, this is years ago, and you know, in the old days you had to send in early to get your tickets, right? And I sent in because I wanted tickets for specific games. And like 6 weeks later, I get sent back with like a handwritten note scrawled on like a legal pad that says, "Sorry, all sold out." And it was like, somebody wanted my tickets. That's what happened. But the good ticket story, I just think this was great. Well, it's not even a ticket story, so I won't tell it, but I'll tell it to you later. But no, I didn't write that story. But you know, right now, it's like the family of 4 price at Fenway is like the average. It's like $350.
Well, this article said, look for the awkward-looking guy in a suit who looks like he just can't wait to dump him and get onto the bar.
Yeah. Well, until very recently, there used to be, I knew somebody who, he said, you know, if he knew somebody at a bar that could get you in Fenway Park. I mean, there's always been ways to get in Fenway Park. In the introduction that I read to the book before you came in, Charlie, I talked about how in the old days, they used to just leave the bleachers unlocked after about the 3rd inning. You could just walk in. Now, they don't do that anymore. But, you know, there's a lot of ushers at Fenway Park who don't want to talk to the tax man at the end of the year, let's put it that way. Because there's always been ways to get in. There used to be, you know, the Gino building, which used to have Nesson offices in it. I was aware of, there were ways to get in through there if you knew the right people. There were people working in that building who would get you into games in exchange for, you know, a favor too.
We were in last week, and we had been in for a few years, that you have these places called Scalp Free Zone, I guess, where people can sell their tickets at face value.
Yeah.
Which I used to have online.
Yeah. Well, and the big scandal, not with just the Red Sox, but with most teams, is the vast number of tickets that they send directly to scalpers from the get-go. I mean, that's always been done. I mean, they can claim that they don't do it, but ticket agencies get the tickets first, and they always have. And, you know, that's when it was, you know, Vinny from Revere, or, you know, your nice, shiny, clean internet ticket selling site. They get them first. Always have, always will.
Well, Glenn, thank you very much. That's all the time we have. It's 3:30.
Thank you. The ticket story. This is the God's truth. A guy I know was at Fenway a couple years ago, and he wanted to get a sausage from outside the park because he liked the sausage came out better outside. Of course, you're not supposed to go out and come back. Remember I said how I met Bill Littlefield
Yeah,
when I was reading poetry outside Fenway
Right.
Park? That's how I met Bill Littlefield, and then a number of years later, this one's yours.
Okay.
A number of years later,
excuse me.
yep. A number of years later, Bill got a call. They wanted him to write a sports biography under Matt Christopher's name. Bill didn't have the time, so he said, why don't you call Glenn? I don't have the time, or the interest in doing it. Well, Matt Christopher was a real person,
Yeah.
but this was the mid-90s. He was no longer well.
Yeah. And they wanted to keep it going.
And they wanted to keep it going. His family did, and then later his estate. So they hired somebody to write the fiction title, and I got hired to write a nonfiction title. At the time, thinking this was just going to be a one-off,
Right.
you know. And I wrote it, and then they were like, "Well, we're going to do some more." So I was like, so I wrote 39 of them in like an 8-year period.
Yeah.
You know, they're just work for hire.
So did you only write the nonfiction ones?
I only wrote the nonfiction
okay.
ones. Somebody else, and I don't know who,
Yeah.
was writing the fiction ones. And then my editor, I hadn't heard from her for a while. I called her up, you know, what are the next Matt Christopher titles? She was like, I'm writing them now. And I was like, oh yeah? She didn't even tell me. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And I'd had the idea to do my own series for a while, so.
It's a great idea.
I got
How
that.
long ago did you come up with this series?
Just the first title came out in the spring.
Okay.
That
Yeah, 'cause I'm
no,
not
the first
following
title came out in the
you.
winter. That one just came out. I got another one coming out in the
Yeah.
fall. Another one coming out next winter, and then hopefully, that's what I got to do next week. Hopefully they'll give me a contract for 4 more because I think it's going to take 8 to really take off. That first one, well, the one that was over there, Yes She Can. That was a Junior Library Guild selection, which is really good.
Yeah.
We're at the Newburyport Literary Festival, 2011, April 30th, isn't it? I believe.
Yes, it is.
Here with Glenn Stout, who was either written or either written or edited a total of 80 books. Is that
Yeah, a little
correct?
more
or-
than 80, somewhere
More than
around
80, okay.
84, 85, depending on how you count.
I mean, I still can't get over how big sports is in this culture. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me.
You know, it's the sports and the weather is the only thing you can talk to anybody about, whether you have any connection with them whatsoever at all. I mean, you know, it's the one thing that crosses, you know, race, class, culture, sex. Sports
Yeah,
is the one, and that's the best part about sports, is that it is one of those things that crosses cultures.
I know you were saying you used to draw baseball fields. I did all that stuff. I could memorize. I memorized every single lineup in the leagues. I mean, that seems like meaningless information, but yet people do it.
Yeah, well, it is meaningless until you give it meaning, you know.
Yeah.
And I always think it's, you know, I even thought I was wasting my time then. But as it turns out, you know, I guess I wasn't, because you never know what it's going to turn into.
Well, actually, when I saw the people, the lineup of the people who are going to be at this, yours was the one that actually caught my eye first. You know, being especially sport. I mean, sports is just so huge. It's huge all over the world, but I mean, in this country, it's baseball primarily. Wouldn't you say baseball is the primary interest?
Yeah, I mean, football, baseball, football, basketball each have their constituencies, and, it's hard to say which is bigger. But I think maybe baseball, even if it doesn't have the numbers, the depth of interest seems to be deeper and wider. Not that people who are into the other sports aren't really into it, but their interests in those sports seem to be narrower.
Right.
That's the only way I can phrase it. There's like, for instance, there's the guys who are in the NFL who are total draftniks.
Yeah.
And that's the part that they like, is the draft aspect of it. And, people who are into basketball, they might more so, they're just into like their team than the overall sport. Baseball, you take the whole enchilada.
Yeah.
More
I
so.
know, Do you have any opinions on who you would say was the best player ever in baseball? I mean, do you have any?
Well, I mean, I think it's hard to argue against Babe Ruth because he did it at the bat and on the mound. And, Ty Cobb was great, Willie Mays was great, but, they only performed on one side of the diamond. And Ruth was one of the best pitchers of his era and unquestionably one of the best hitters. So it's hard to argue against that. Although, also he was playing in an all-white league. So
That's true, yeah.
there's that question there too. But I think you can't, in questions like that, you can't deal with what wasn't, you'll never know. The best player might have been somebody we never heard of who was playing in some semi-pro team somewhere. We just don't know.
No, Glenn, I'd like to ask you about it's something that bothers me, and it's bothering a lot of people, about the steroid issue in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, well, my feeling on the steroid issue is this. I think that basically from about 1988 till probably 2008, that every season has an asterisk next to it. And every player has an asterisk next to it.
Yeah.
Whether they use steroids or not, I think a lot of people in the game knew what was going on, and a lot of people looked the other way. I mean, so my standard response is, I think they should have a plaque in the Hall of Fame with an asterisk and says, from 1988 to 2008, the game was compromised by the use of performance-enhancing drugs. All records in this era should be considered suspect. And, and I know that makes, this is Red Sox country. A lot of Red Sox fans are like, well, what are you saying? Well, and it also makes a lot of Yankee fans upset because, and I think even the players that didn't use knew what was going on, and nobody, now, has the game ever been completely clean? No. But this was egregious, and, it did change the game. People did not normally hit 70 home runs.
No.
And all of a sudden you had a bunch of guys throwing 98. And isn't it amazing now? All of a sudden people don't throw 98 anymore and they don't hit 70 home runs. Gee, what happened? And then the people say, oh, it was just, the small ballparks and stuff. That's a load. So that's my feeling on it. And it has, I think, diminished to some degree my enjoyment of the game. I am not as rabid a fan as I used to be. I'm just not.
No, I know.
I enjoy it. I still watch. But it's no longer a matter of life and death.
I find that's becoming more of a common sentiment.
Yeah.
I hear that more and more now. I never used to hear it as much.
Yeah, baseball lost something that it'll never get back. And I think that's very unfortunate. And I think there's plenty of blame to go around from not just the players, but the management who were running the game. Because, there were people profiting on this, and they weren't all just players. There were a lot of owners. And MLB as a corporate entity made money off of it. Absolutely. And money corrupts everything. And they were all making so much money that nobody wanted to look.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. No, on a more lighter note, your book. This is a book that's in.
Right, Before Steroids, Fenway1912, The Birth of a Ballpark, a Championship Season, and Fenway's Remarkable First Year, which will come out this October. And it is what I just explained. I start detailing the construction of the ballpark, how it was actually built, unveil a lot of new information that that no one has ever heard before. And it makes anything you've heard about the building of the ballpark, this book makes obsolete. And I think it does the same thing with anything you've really learned about the 1912 season or the 1912 World Series, which has been the subject of some other books, but I think this tells the story better and uncovers a lot of new information. I think it's the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah, and now you've been to a lot of other newer ballparks. Do you like the newer ones that are actually made like old ones? But
I actually haven't been to very many of
Oh,
the
you
new
haven't?
parks.
Okay.
You know, I'm up in Vermont. We don't get around that much anymore. What I think is interesting is that many of the changes that have taken place with Fenway Park over the past decade, and particularly in the past 4 or 5 years, many of the changes that have taken place with Fenway Park are now mimicking the old ballparks, the newer retro parks rather, like Camden Yards, that were originally built to mimic Fenway. Now Fenway is mimicking them in a lot of the amenities and a lot of the things they're doing. I think that's actually kind of real interesting that it's flipped over. Fenway's now mimicking the one ballparks that were built to mimic Fenway. You know, I find Fenway today like a little too busy for my taste. Forget the economic issues of how expensive it is,
Yeah, I
but
know.
there's the constant assault of noise,
Yeah,
and then also what I find just as disturbing is kind of the visual. There's no place to rest your eyes without getting a corporate message anywhere.
Right.
And it's real interesting to, when you have a chance to look at a broadcast from a game that was broadcast from the, say, mid-90s or before, particularly from the 1980s. Fenway Park, there's not a sign. It's almost Spartan. There's nothing in it.
Right.
You know, it's as calm as Ned Martin's voice, you know.
I know.
For better or for worse, but I actually, that's the era when I, you know,
Yeah, I
went
know.
to a lot of
Yeah,
games,
yeah.
and that's the era that I preferred when it was just a ballpark. And now
Yeah, I
it's
know,
all
I
these
know.
other things too, and it's the nature of change, is the nature of the world, but I kind of preferred it the old way.
Yeah, I think it's a game of tradition. I think it always will be. I mean, I don't know, the kids, I guess the kids today have a different perception of what they want as far as the technology at the game and everything, and corporate, you know, box seats, whatever, corporate boxes, and
Well, everybody wants to be entertained all the time.
yeah, that's true.
You know, I mean, and so it's designed to entertain you all the time and to, you know, all the new ballparks. And I think you almost have to consider Fenway a new ballpark now because of the way it's changed.
Yeah.
They're designed to extract money from your pocket and to sell you stuff. That's their purpose. It's not just the game anymore, but it's also to get you to buy food, get you to buy drink, get you to buy memorabilia, get you to buy souvenirs, get you to buy parking, get you to go down 2 hours earlier and start spending money and stay 2 hours after the game and keep spending money. That's what a ballpark is for now. It's almost like the actual field itself is the least important part of it.
Yeah.
You know?
That's
What-
interesting.
what's-
That's interesting, yeah.
The place where the actual
Right,
game takes
yeah.
place is almost the least important part of it. Everything else is, you know, and that's unfortunate. But again, it's the nature of everything in this country these days.
I did take a tour of Fenway about 5 years ago for the first time in my life, and it was amazing to walk on the field, places, walk around the perimeter. I mean, it's just awe-inspiring.
It's still a great place. I was fortunate enough to get to take batting practice down there one time, and that was wall's a little farther away when you're on the field. It looks close, but it's still a little farther away than you
Was
think
that
it is.
with the Red Sox, or?
No, it was a charity thing,
okay.
and somebody comped me on it. I didn't have to pay, but I got to take like, I don't know, 15 pitches.
Did you get to hit any out, you know, out to the field?
I hit the wall, but it rolled.
Oh, you did? Oh, that's pretty good.
Well, it rolled. I didn't hit it on the fly. No, the only good one I hit was like was a good shot to center that still was about 50 feet from the fence. You know, I hit a routine fly ball. So, but it still was fun.
Well, thanks a lot for talking to us, Havel Community Television, and it's been a real pleasure. And you've written so many books and edited so many books, and this one here is with Peter Gammons, right?
Right, the best American sports writer.
Yeah. And is this in a series or?
Yes, this is a series that this is actually the 20th edition.
This is the 20th. Okay. And everybody here, I haven't read it yet, but everybody said this is a great compilation.
Yeah, it's you know, the best. We try to put the best sports writing of the year together in one place, and it's been successful for 20 years, and I think this edition is nonetheless so.
And I'm glad that Peter Gammons is his health. He seems to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, he seems to be
yeah,
doing fine,
yeah.
and he was terrific to work with.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Glenn. And this book will be coming out in October, Fenway1912, and I think it's going to be a hit.
I
I'm
hope
sure
so.
it is. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thanks
it.
a lot. Thanks.